Tonight we're going to look into the diffusion of belief systems. Here is a historical video about the diffusion of our belief systems. See the rise of Hinduism, the Indus Valley. Abraham, our founder of Judaism, is born. Israel rises, spreads, Hebrew beliefs. Meanwhile, you have Siddhartha Gautama. And under Ashoka, Buddhism spreads. Judaism exists still in the Middle East. Our Jewish exile. Christians spread throughout Europe. Israel spread throughout the Middle East, North Africa, and Spain, which are Islamic empires. Buddhism rises and shifts largely in East Asia. You can see a little bit of Islam in Southeast Asia. Some Christianity in Africa remains. Ethiopia, as does Judaism. Right, the Europeans are Christian. They start to conquer the New World. Their colonies become Christian. Europe divides up Africa and colonizes it. After World War II, we create Israel. Okay. So what we're going to look at in this lecture is how historians would track and study the spread of religions. How do they know what religions rose when, see existing evidence of these religions, etc., even if they are no longer prominent in a region. So we'll start with Christianity. In Christianity, you can see how it spread by the 400s CE, but the earliest Christians rose in the Middle East, what is modern-day Turkey, Egypt, and North Africa, with a little bit in the Mediterranean. Right? It was a little bit later that Christianity spread throughout Ethiopia and more southern regions of East Africa, throughout the Middle East, throughout Rome, Spain, etc. And then under the Roman Empire is where you see the light yellow. In those regions of France, England, North Africa, etc., is because of the Roman Empire spreading Christianity. So largely centered in our Mediterranean region, a little bit over during this time in India because of trade. We'll get to that. Some evidence and way historians know this is you can see our Eastern European churches, which have more dome-like structures. They're not as Gothic or the cathedrals you might be used to seeing. And Emperor Constantine built these in what is modern-day Turkey and Eastern Europe. You also have images of Christ like this that are called idols, right, where we'll talk about this when we talk about the split in Christianity, but some regions used to pray to idols or images. They look very regal, right? Gold, tiled in mosaic, etc. Other evidence of Christianity we see in Ethiopia. We have churches and shrines that date back to the first few centuries right? And this is a very famous one in Lalibela. So even though Christians later convert, or Europeans later convert much of Africa to Christianity, this region in East Africa has been Christian since near the beginning. Now we have Hinduism and Buddhism. And so you can see the spread of Hinduism and Indo-Buddhist influence in India, Southeast Asia, etc. A lot of this is because of trade, right? And missionaries traveling along the Silk Roads, which we'll discuss in more detail, but a lot of it's because of trade. And then our Buddhist influence spreads more through China, Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, Papua New Guinea. We'll get to that. And that is through trade as well. It is not through conquest. And you can see that India reverted primarily to Hinduism. There's still Buddhism, but the later Mauryan empires and Gupta empires started to use Hinduism rather than Buddhist practices. It worked a little better for their keeping order of the empire. It allowed the emperor to kind of claim, religious, closer to religious divinity, whereas Buddhism didn't believe in the caste system, didn't believe in social hierarchy. It made those in power, made it harder for them to claim, authority. So the Gupta will find the caste system convenient for their leadership, their bureaucracy of leadership. But we do have evidence of Buddhism, of course, in India, because it's still there today, but also it spread widely under Ashoka. And this is a stupa, which is a Buddhist shrine, and it's meant to be symbolic of Buddha's burial mound, so that is why the dome. And this was constructed in the 3rd century by Ashoka. He is the one that adopted Buddhism and spread it widely throughout India. Prior to Ashoka, in the 3rd century, India was primarily Hindu. The shrine you see here has been built upon and improved, but it's in the same location. Other shrines in India, you have the Mahabodhi temple, and this is believed to be built under the original Bodhi tree where Buddha went and meditated and discovered the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and achieved enlightenment. So you can see some of the detail in the shrine. And the Buddhist shrines, especially in India, look pretty similar to the Hindu shrines, and I'll show you one of those in a moment. But here you see different Buddhas throughout the world. I'll show you a map in a second. And because of syncretism and cultural diffusion, you'll see that the Buddha in India looks more like this, more thin, regal, serious. And you might be familiar with the jolly, round-bellied, giggling Buddha from China. And that is because the Chinese Buddhism believed that Buddhism would bring you happiness and joy, whereas the Indian Buddhism focused more on obedient behavior, not having desire, part of the Four Noble Truths. Freeing yourself from desire, which includes luxuries like overeating, etc. So here's our map of Buddhist temples all throughout China. Buddhism diffused profusely throughout China. Later, because of China's influence in the region, to Vietnam, Korea, Japan. And a lot of this has occurred because of the Silk Road. But Buddhism really rose to prominence after the fall of the Han Empire during the period of warring states. Again, this idea that religion appeals when there is not a strong government to lead, because it can keep order in place of a government. Here you see a map of the spread of world religion. So you have Christianity originating in the Middle East, spreading throughout Europe and North Africa along the Mediterranean and East Africa. And then also a bit along the Silk Road, especially with Alexander the Great, who conquered much of the Middle East, spreading throughout the Middle East. You see Buddhism spreading and mostly leaving India. Hinduism remains in India but spreads a bit to Southeast Asia. Here's a more detailed map of later spreads. So you can see once sea trade starts, you have Islam spreading to West Africa, etc. And here is a Hindu temple in India, and you'll notice that it does have some similar architecture to the Buddhist temples. It's more reflective of the region than of the religion, which you'll see as well in in Eastern Europe with our Christian cathedrals compared to our Muslim mosques. So they'll look rather similar. And that has to do with building supplies and cultures of the time. Okay, so that is our lecture on the spread of religion.